Welcome to Fight for Democracy. This is kind of a special episode. I've been mostly on hiatus, but I wanted to step in and give my feelings about the various propositions, try to explain them. They're pretty clear, they're not too confusing, and I wanted to be able to share with you all my perspective on them, as you, like me, might have not have voted by now. I'm recording this on the evening of the 5th, so the election's in a few days. I have a mail-in ballot, but I'm going to be filling it out and dropping it off on election day. So if you haven't filled out your ballot yet and you're looking on YouTube, or if you're one of my subscribers and you're just checking out what I'm talking about, I just wanted to share this with you. These propositions aren't too bad. There are a few that can be a little bit confusing, and they all have commercials and various sides attempting to use misinformation. But these are propositions that you can pretty much vote what you feel is the right thing for them, and you won't really be led astray. There's nothing here that's like a trick question that's going to, the answer sounds like it should be yes, but it's really no, and you'll be betraying yourself by voting the wrong way. Everything here is pretty much of what you expected, just a matter of whether or not you're in favor of what the proposition's proposing or ratifying. The one thing I want to point out that some people don't notice about the propositions is there's some propositions that get put on the ballot, like Prop 1, because the nature of the legislation requires them to go to the people for a vote. So Prop 1 was actually voted on by an overwhelming majority of the California legislature, but it's still, because it's a constitutional amendment, have to be voted on by the citizens. Most of the other propositions are just done from ballot initiatives, and people go out and gather signatures and do that. There's another proposition, Prop 31, that has to do with flavored cigarettes. That was also legislation that was passed in the California legislature and signed into law, but there was a referendum triggered by a ballot initiative by the people that are not happy with that law, the cigarette interests primarily, that tried to overturn it. And so when you look on the ballot, you can actually see, they'll usually explain this to you. At the top, they'll say something about where it came from. Was it a ballot initiative or was it from legislation? And that can give you some indication if it's something that you need to worry about, like, because anybody can put something on the ballot. So some people worry about if it's a ballot initiative, they're more leery of it, which I think is a reasonable position to have. And you can tell that by looking at it. And actually, if it was like the Prop 1, you can actually see the vote. If you open your ballot guide, your voter's guide from California, the big thick one, it actually show you the vote from the California legislature in it. So Proposition 1 is a constitutional amendment to the California Constitution, not the federal one. And the purpose of it is to codify the rights that women have come to know and expect based on the Roe v. Wade decision in California into the California Constitution. Now, of course, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and so was Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which is a decision that built off of Roe v. Wade. And so those have been overturned. This is kind of, to some extent, a virtue signal, although I think it is important for the state to codify these rights when the federal government no longer has. But understand that this is kind of a reaction to that decision and the need now felt by politicians and some people to protect those rights at a state level, since they aren't protected at a federal level anymore. As far as Prop 1, if you're quote-unquote pro-choice, you would vote yes on it. If you're quote-unquote pro-life, you would vote against it. And there's nothing fancy about that. There's no trickery going on there. Pretty straightforward. The next two propositions are Prop 26 and Prop 27. Now, Prop 26 is a proposition put on by the big Indian tribes that have big casinos in California, and I think maybe some other racetrack interests or something. The point is, you have a big entrenched gambling interest in California, which are not happy about Prop 27. So they brought on Prop 26, which gives them the ability to do sports gambling at their facilities. This is various Indian casinos and also some specific racetracks in California. In addition, Prop 26 also gives them the ability to do certain types of dice games I guess they couldn't do before, like craps and what's the one with the spinning wheel? Roulette. And I think there's one other one. But the point is, there's a couple, and actually dice. So that's their proposition, so that they can expand their gambling activities and their profit making. Prop 27 is sports gambling. It's funded by the sports gambling apps like DraftKings and FanDuel. And they're trying to expand their access to California, because right now they can't run in California. And if you're signed up on those apps and you say you're in California, you can't play them. So this is them trying to use the proposition system to gain access to California as a market. And as far as voting, as far as your vote, you know, neither proposition has any real poison pills in it. This is pretty much what I'm telling you. If you're for those things, go ahead and vote for them. If you don't want apps and phones for Prop 27, if you don't want sports gambling and Indian casinos, vote against 27 and 26 respectfully. Me, I'm not sure. I'm so kind of on the fence about it. The reality is, not having these things in California won't really protect things from. I mean, lotteries are gambling. There's a lot of ways to look at this. And it's not as simple as gambling bad, vote against them, in my opinion. It's really more complicated. It involves how you feel about the Indian casinos and their monopoly on gambling in California, how you feel about app-based gambling in general. So it's really, there's a lot to think about, and I think every person should just vote what their conscience is as far as those. I think what I heard was a few days ago from actually the CEO of DraftKings is that they're not doing very well, and it's likely not to succeed. So I wouldn't spend too much time thinking about it. It looks like it's not doing too well if the guy who runs DraftKings is already kind of signaling, hey, we're not going to win this battle. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about it too much. Just vote your conscience. Prop 28 is a pretty milquetoast ballot initiative proposition. What it does is allocate $1 billion a year to the public schools of California to support arts and music education. Nobody even bothered to write to present negative or opposing viewpoints in the California ballot guide. If you're in favor of it, vote for it. If you don't think it's a good idea, don't vote for it. But it's not a huge deal. It is unfunded, I would say that. There's nothing in it that I could see that provides additional funding. It would come out of the general fund for California, which on the order of things is about between 120 and 140 billion dollars. So it's about like a 1% increase in spending relative to the amount of money we bring in from California income taxes, most of which goes to the general fund. Prop 29 is one of the controversial ones. That's the one we see all the ads talking about, don't vote against Prop 29, they're going to take away my dialysis, I'm going to die. First of all, if you're more than 20-something years old, you probably saw the same commercials, or very similar ones, a few years ago. This proposition was put on a ballot, I think in 2020 or 2018. I want to say 2020. And it's back. And what does Prop 29, in this case it's Prop 29, what Prop 29 does is it requires that dialysis facilities, which are primarily run privately, have healthcare people there that have a certain qualification in order to supervise what's happening. Because one concern that some people have about these dialysis clinics is that they're understaffed and people have medical emergencies there, and the people that are there can't help it. Like they have to, they're putting a line in your arm and they're running a dialysis process on you, and most of the time it goes fine, but sometimes things go wrong. A lot of people with kidney problems that require dialysis are very elderly, and so even something simple as a basic dialysis process can be met with complications. So what Prop 29 is doing is trying to say, hey, DaVita is one of the bigger companies, take some of your profits and hire some qualified people to make sure nobody dies at your facilities. I think it's perfectly reasonable. Those ads don't scare me. Thing about ads on television, a lot of them are lies. This one strikes me as being dishonest. And to me, there's nothing in the law that would intrinsically cause a clinic to close. Now, some of them are barely making any money, then they might close. And so there are some edge cases that might be true for. But by and large, the DaVita makes plenty of money, enough money to spend tons of it on commercials to protect their financial interests. They can pay for more qualified staff to make sure people don't die at their facilities. So for me, I'm a yes on Prop 29, but it comes down to that one, how you feel about dialysis clinics and whether or not you think more qualified people need to be there. But I wouldn't go by the ads of the person telling you don't vote on it because you're going to kill them. That's really entirely unreasonable and pretty cynical way of doing that. They could actually come and speak honestly and clearly, but instead they just want to scare people into voting against it. And it worked last time, so just trying it again. My hope is that it passes this time, but we'll see. Prop 30 is the other complicated one. And you've seen ads, I think, probably on both sides. I think Governor Newsom is the one talking about, I think he came out against Prop 30, but the California Democratic Party came out in favor of it. So let me explain Prop 30 in simple terms and Let you make your own decision. So what Prop 30 does is it raises taxes 1.75%, which is a large amount to people only who make over $2 million a year in income, which isn't a lot of people. So it's not a tax that would hit the majority of Californians. Now, what's the purpose of it? Well, it's split up into three different basic pieces of a pie. There's actually a pie chart in the California Voters Guide if you look in there. 45% of that money goes to provide money for individuals and businesses and the government to buy electric zero-emission vehicles, called ZEVs, zero-emission vehicles. 35% goes to charging facilities, like in communities and in both in residential and business areas, in order to allow people to charge them. I don't know if it would be free to use these facilities as citizens afterward. That wasn't clear to me, but you need to build them. That's a lot of money up front to build them. I suspect there may be a public-private partnership thing. We end up paying some money, but not too much. I think that's already happened in some places like is it Culver City? No, in Burbank, I think has something like that where you don't pay a lot because it's supplemented by the government, but you pay a little bit, and they built the facilities out in various places. So, if 35% of the money goes to that, and it raises $3 to $5 billion a year according to California, their estimates based on the California Voters Guide, and the last 20% goes to addressing issues about wildfires. And that seems kind of thrown in there as a sort of, hey, we had those really bad wildfires. Well, we're going to help on that too. It doesn't really fit with the motif of the law. And it seems to me you could have raised the taxes less and made it about one thing instead of just throwing the wildfire thing in there. But here's the thing. There was a law passed, or actually not a law passed. Rideshare companies in California, this is another thing you need to know to help understand this issue. Rideshare companies in California need to be 90% zero emission by 2030. This is mandated by a California emissions office, some kind of bureaucratic entity under the governor and our state government. And that's why you have the company Lyft involved with passing this bill, because if they are able to pass this, they're essentially, the company Lyft and other private entities can then ask the government for some of this taxpayer money to help them to supplement their money to stay in line with the requirements of California. So essentially, I'm being a little bit unclear. Essentially, Lyft and various other businesses don't want to have to pay for the zero emission requirements that California is putting on them, so they're taxing us. Now, us usually doesn't mean probably not you or me, but the very richest Californians. And some people don't mind that too much. The California Democratic Party doesn't mind it. They're supporting it. Gavin Newsom, though, who I think is more allied with, say, teachers who are concerned about the lack of funding for schools from the state standpoint, saying you're spending money, you're subsidizing private companies with this tax instead of spending money on kids' educations. And so the California Teachers Union and organizations like that have come out against it. And I think Gavin Newsom, from a political standpoint, decided to align with them. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit about what's going on with that. In theory, it looks fine. Like, if I think we need to have more EVs. That's a good idea. And we need to fight wildfires, so I'll vote for it. But remember, we can't tax we can't keep on adding more taxes for everything. So when add this this is like $3 to $5 billion a year. This is a not insignificant amount of additional taxes every month in terms of income tax at the highest bracket. We do that, that's money that can't be taxed for something like education or something else that might be more worthwhile, or maybe even just something that's 100% wildfires instead of 20% wildfires, and let Lyft and other businesses pay for it themselves. And the thing about it is, this supplement or this subsidy aren't going to help the poorest among Californians. This is primarily going to go to not necessarily the $2 million making people, but it's probably going to go to people that make several $100,000 a year, because those folks, I mean, honestly, I do okay myself. I'm going to get an EV in 5 or 6 years. This might help me, but somebody, who's just trying to make ends meet, a subsidy, unless the ZEV is free, they're not going to be able to get this. So it isn't necessarily that progressive of a tax either. It's a little bit, but not necessarily that much, because you got a lot of people who will be taxed on this that might end up turning around and using it. And a lot of it's going to go to businesses, which they don't talk about a lot, but I think it's important to understand that we'd be subsidizing businesses with this tax on California citizens. I think that those businesses make enough money to align them to address this requirement in California without taxing California citizens. So I'll be voting against it, but it's not something that's so terrible that I'm, running around my hair on fire screaming about we can't do it. And I think reasonable people can disagree about it. So, understanding that, do what thou wilt. As I mentioned earlier, Prop 31 is a referendum on a law that was previously passed. And what that means is there was a law that was passed and signed into law banning certain types of flavored cigarettes in 2020. The companies that make money off of flavored cigarettes, like menthol, which I found out is basically mint. I didn't know, I don't smoke cigarettes, but it's basically mint, that are targeted towards younger people, arguably underage people, was banned here in California. And I think the ban also may have included vaping, that flavor vape for vaping as well. I'm not sure about that, because I remember that being a big issue, and that kind of brought it more to the forefront because vaping had very, great flavor vape, and all these vapes is very, where cigarettes it was more kind of low key. The vape stuff is much more over the top, directed towards kids, and I think that outraged people more. But anyway, that law was passed, signed into law. That cost the cigarette companies and related interests a lot of money, and so they paid for people to go out and gather signatures to put a referendum on that law. And a referendum does, any law that's passed in California through our direct democracy process, you can have a referendum on it. And so apparently, and this is something that's kind of confusing, in a referendum, if you vote yes on the referendum, the law stays in place. So a yes on that means you like the law, want it to stay. If you vote no on it, it means you don't want the law to stay in place. The law is then removed from the books, thanks to direct democracy. So, do what you feel as far as whether or not you want flavored cigarettes in California. I don't. I think cigarette smoking is one of those things that bell bottoms where, like, who still does that? But, that's my personal feeling about it. I think if people want to smoke, they still can. But particular flavors directed towards younger people, I think because of how, how addictive cigarettes are, very chemically addictive. I think we have to be very careful about allowing kids to get hooked on them and be extra vigilant about that. And they'll say to you, oh, it's already illegal for kids to buy cigarettes. It's illegal for kids to buy alcohol. It happens. But things that are directed towards kids, I think we have to be extra special about, especially when it's addictive and very life-damaging the way cigarettes are in particular. So I'll be voting for Prop 31 because I'm for the law it's a referendum on. Anyway, I hope this has helped you with the propositions and giving you some clarity about what's at stake. And no matter who you are, if you listen to this, don't forget to vote on election day or vote before if you can. I'm going to probably tomorrow go ahead and fill out my ballot. And thank you for taking the time to listen to this and for participating in our democracy. This is Fight for Democracy, signing off. Oh, please remember to consider subscribing, and thanks for watching.